Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. This month, he and his mom definitely need to pay off their housing debt. Social Security payments didn't cover the rent completely. And Mr. Jones, the landlord, had already hinted more than once that he wasn't a beggar's lodge. Molly grinned bitterly and gripped the shaft of her broom with naughty fingers. Who are she and her mom if they are beggars, and in a lodging house they will go if they can't start paying on time? Though the lodgings in their neighborhood were only 3 days a week at most, and then it's out to the street under the bridge. Welcome. This early morning was unusually Asian for a state bordering Mexico. Weather forecasters said the comparative proximity to the mountain range was to blame. But Molly was only glad of that, because from the sweltering and covering the town with a sweltering blanket of heat late summer smoothly flowed into fall, she was ready to howl afterward. Better they should be freezing than suffocate without air conditioning, she thought, which Mr. Jones wouldn't let any of the tenants install. After all, it would have raised his costs of maintaining the house as a whole, and thus reduced his profits. A girl in a pink tracksuit ran past Molly, white sneakers, headphones with energetic music, blonde hair bouncing on the back of her head. Molly gave her a wistfully envious look. Some people lived. She was unfamiliar with the jogger, but knew that she lived in that house, around which there was a neat lawn with a whitewashed fence. In the morning, her husband left for work in an expensive sports car, and she all day long must have had fun walking her tiny chihuahua named Princess. And anyway, Molly, gritting her teeth. In general, she was used to their poverty. But how unbearable was it to be poor when you lived next door to a prosperous, wealthy neighborhood? Such was the paradox. The house, which contained private apartments, the landlord, created by him under a special program of social housing from the state, wedged exactly killed clay bowl in the middle of the table server china into this neighborhood. And the house would have been torn down, and the occupants resettled long ago. But Mr. Jones put such a multi-million-dollar price on the building that the developer's lawyers were frothing at the mouth in amazement. That's why it had to be for the good, well-mannered, and so on. Residents of this suburb to neighbor with all sorts of socially unacceptable elements that simply could not be gotten rid of now. The autumn wind flapped its invisible wing and threw golden leaves under Molly's feet. The girl energetically worked with the broom. Yes, the morning was wonderful. The sun was shining. It was Saturday on the calendar. And when Molly was still a baby, and it seemed like an eternity ago, on weekends she and her mom would go for walks in the park. And once they even went to a traveling circus. The girl forever remembered the sweet aroma of cotton candy, roasted nuts, and popcorn. Yes, she and her mom had been happy once. It seemed like the American dream was coming true. After all, what is it not a fairy tale if an ordinary orphanage wins a green card and can go to America? But Molly was born not here, but in Russia, where her father also stayed, who did not need a pregnant mistress. Molly knew. Her mother once thought that all Americans passionately need a Russian wife. And that's why, by the way, much of the meager savings that remained after the move, she spent on a marriage agency. But it turned out that there is no hype around Russian brides, and certainly no one wanted her. Nancy went to work in a factory that produced canned vegetables, mostly beans. Molly went to school, and here it was as if in compensation from fate for the first failed plans. School was fine. The other kids didn't take offense. Teachers were attentive, and learning was easy. So by the age of 10, Molly spoke English much better than her mother. She also thought about how she would go to college and everything would be fine. The teachers said she had really good prospects. The thing is that at some point, Molly began to study so sharply that on the personal order of the principal, she was allowed to take a few extra classes at school. And it so happened that by the time she was 16, she was graduating. But then he came into the life of their little family. Stephen, just one day, Nancy brought him to their house. Once they had a normal house, albeit not a rich one, a rented one too, but normal. And told him he was the new daddy and husband. Molly didn't like Stephen right away. He was insolent, rude, taught everyone who was weaker how to live, and hardly worked, but managed to find money for booze and cards. Molly refused to call him daddy, and that became one of the reasons for their feud. And then Stephen set Nancy up. Yes, Molly had no doubt that the bastard had planned the whole thing from the beginning, and that's why he'd gotten together with her mom in the first place, because she was a gullible fool. Stephen wanted to do some dirty deed with someone else's hands. So one day he said a friend of his working in Lombardy had asked him to resell some stuff. "I'm busy at work, I'm loaded," he explained to Nancy. "Here are the keys. My friend is on bedside duty for his sick grandmother, so he wants you to go to the pawn shop yourself, pick up the items, and take them to the buyer. Don't worry, everything's gonna be fine." Since that fateful nightmare that turned their little family's life upside down. It's been 2 years now, but Molly still couldn't figure out if her mother knew then what she was getting into in court. She would later, sobbing, assure her that she had been duped and had not suspected a thing. That day, Nancy told Molly that it was enough for her to give up. She needed to be an adult and help her family make money. "Mom, I don't want to go anywhere." The girl tried to say no. "I need to study. I want to go to university. I want to go to university." "Yeah, now," pursed her lips. "Nancy, you make me sound like a millionaire. There's a scholarship to pay for your studies," sighed Molly. "I can do this, I know it. I can get a good job." "Shut your mouth when your mother's talking. Don't you dare interrupt me," Nancy screamed. She always yelled when she was in a bad mood, except she yelled at her daughter, not her roommate, because she was afraid of Stephen. "Maybe I wanted a lot of things too." "And what did you get?" Nancy continued her rant. "I sold the apartment I was supposed to have as an orphan just to go to America. I thought I'd have a life here. Why do you think you're better than me? Nobody needs the smartest. And me," Nancy, sobbing. Then it got noisy. "Nobody wants you. Then why didn't you go back?" Molly asked. Nancy stiffened, then pressed her lips into a string for breathing hard. Her face flushed, and she flew over to the table where her daughter was studying. She knocked books off it with her hand. "Don't you dare do that to your mother. Get ready to help." They got in Stephen's car, drove to the pawn shop, and then it got really bad. Anyway, it turned out that those keys were a copy, and the pawn shop owner, though he knew Stephen, had never authorized him to do anything. And as Nancy's mother carried out the last plasma TV, about to load it into the car, and Molly stomped along, she was carrying some kind of vase. The police showed up. Just some concerned neighbor called, realizing they were robbing a pawn shop. "Put your hands up," officer yelled. Pointed a gun at Nancy. She hesitated. How could you throw an expensive television set on the ground? She tried to explain to the police that she was merely fulfilling a request from her husband, who in turn had been asked by a friend. And she was later found to have stepped toward the police, even though she was told to stay where she was, and the officer opened fire. The lawyer they were provided for free said it was only because of this mishap that Nancy was able to avoid actual jail time. The police department was afraid of charges on her part, so they made some sort of agreement. Nancy doesn't have a claim, and the police chief makes a deal with the prosecutor. And because of the police officer's haste, Nancy is left disabled. The doctor said that it was a miracle that she was alive at all and could move her legs a little. They also said that theoretically they could do surgery, but it was so expensive, and even the most expensive insurance wouldn't cover it. And Molly and her mom had no health insurance at all at the time of the accident. Molly, by the way, she was sent to a special institution for juvenile delinquents for the duration of the proceedings because she was suspected of complicity. And although she was not beaten there, she was fed not badly, and the local psychologists supported her in every possible way. Those few months were the worst of her life. Molly knew that she was not a thief, she was innocent, and at the same time she felt like a real criminal. How ashamed she was to look people in the eye when they let her out of there. The real one who went to prison was Stephen. The police found that he had been involved in many burglaries in the neighborhood. And then Nancy and Molly had to leave home, moving into a small apartment, so-called social housing, for which they had to pay an extra $300 a month. And they hadn't paid it in 6 months. Almost all the cash had been eaten up by Nancy's medical bills. And now Molly was living in a new reality of need and guilt. She had to talk her mom out of this. After all, she hadn't liked the idea from the start. And then there was the despair. Molly was used to them buying the cheapest groceries they could find. And they're always cutting coupons out of newspapers to get a discount. There were still, by the way, food banks and some charities where they could get help. But Nancy wouldn't let Molly go there. "We don't need handouts," screamed the mother. "We'd rather die, do you hear me? I'm not gonna grovel." Molly's sticks only took her breath away in those moments. She almost hated her mom for Nancy's stupidity for getting involved with that Stephen. Molly was trapped. She was still only 16, even though she was supposed to be. She'd be 17 in a month, and a party with cake and presents was out of the question in their plight. In the second place, Molly understood that now the road to university and in general to independent life is closed for her because her mother is sick. She is an invalid, barely able to move small checkers with walking legs, and only if she took a horse dose of painkillers, which could not be taken in multiples. They had no money for a nurse, so Molly couldn't even go to work. She helped her mom change her clothes, bathed, cooked her meals, served her what she needed. For the first time, they survived on benefits, not even a wheelchair. The local disability service said that Nancy was at the back of the queue and would get a wheelchair in 4 years at best. Then Molly realized that it could not go on like this, and ignoring the scandals, she decided to get a job, and she succeeded. Her kind savior was Mr. Lee. He owns a Chinese store selling everything from instant noodles to dog food to construction tools. Usually behind the counter was Mr. Lee's daughter, this young, smiling and open-minded girl who seemed to be 2 years younger than Molly. Her name translated as Beautiful Plum. They became fast friends. Sometimes, looking at how communicates with mom and dad, how they are close, love each other like a real family, Molly felt heartache. She was tormented by white envy because her family was not like that. And then, to make some more money, Molly suggested to Mr. Johnson that she could fill in for Rick. He was their janitor, but he had retired. Mr. Jones snickered and said she would sweep the yard for 1,000 years to cover the rent debt. "I'll settle for withholding 50% of my wages," the girl and the landlord boldly replied. "I'm rounding my eyes, but I need cash, and I can do more than sweep the yard and paint the walls in the entryway. I can trim those bushes, get them in neat shape." Jones chuckled something about being cocky and savvy beyond his years. He agreed, and Molly had a plan ready. Yes, they need to pay their bills, of course. But Mom also really needs a wheelchair. Then she could get out for walks, and it would make her feel better. In addition, Mom will be less burdened. Molly will be able to get to the toilet, to the kitchen. Anyway, it was a necessity. "Look, guys, who do we have here?" A mocking voice brought Molly out of her musings on life, and she threw her head down. Immediately, paint rushed to her face, and her heart pounded faster, just like a bunny who spotted Alice coming. "What are you doing here?" Mary Archie Stone spat through his teeth on the ground, under the girl's feet, and grinned broadly. So the janitor did. "When are you gonna get that white trash out of here?" Archie was a local boy, from a good, not poor family. I think, as Molly knew, he was about 17. He was also a bully and the leader of his own little gang. True, since the neighborhood itself had relatives and generally all decent society would quickly put a stop to his activities. Archie and his henchmen usually went further out on the town. Afternoon. Molly decided that it was better to be polite and not to give in to provocation. She also remembered what her teacher once said in biology class: "If you meet predators, don't show them fear. They can smell it." Omni does not depend on the terms of resettlement of the house and its demolition. She answered with restraint. Mr. Jones is in charge of all those matters. She was silent, looking at the asphalt, all the leaves in front of her. There were full trash cans standing nearby. The car that would pick them up wasn't expected until tomorrow morning. I don't care, Archie bellowed, pitching forward and sending a new spitball under Molly's feet. We don't need no criminals around here. You think we don't know what you and Mom are up to? The kid grinned. She got shot, that you steal alone. Now, you know, if he tries to clean out our house, my old man's got a Colt, and he's got a right to take you down. Leave me alone, Molly exclaimed. She didn't mean it, but tears spurted from her eyes. You have no right to say that. You don't know anything about me. Go away. I have work to do. She's got a lot of nerve. Archie's got a fist in his side from his brother Mark, a lad of about 12. Why don't we teach her a lesson? That's a great idea. Archie laughed. Come on, boys. Molly dropped her broom and swung her arms. A handful of scarlet leaves were thrown at her. Some of them caught on her hair and clothes, and then she resisted with all her might. But what could she do? A fragile 16-year-old girl against 4 boys united by anger and impunity. 2 of them brought Molly to her knees, and 2 of them tipped a trash can of plastic milk and juice bottles over her head. Fish giblets, scraps of toilet paper, flaccid greens, a wide variety of garbage, rolled the girl in a stinking wave. Hey, the friendly, lonely laughter of the boys was interrupted by a sharp shout from the opposite side of the street. Let go of the girl. Molly threw tangled hair trying to get some of the sticky, slippery slime from the trash can. She saw a guy walking across the street toward them. A neighbor, I think. Yeah, that's right. He showed up in their neighborhood a couple weeks ago. A friend in an army uniform brought him in. He helped carry this guy's stuff into the house because this still mysterious neighbor limped badly on one leg and even used a cane sometimes. The house he moved into had been empty for years. And this guy, what was his name? Molly didn't know, but right now he was rushing toward her. And next to him was a German Shepherd dog. Mind your own business. Stepping up from the teenage gang was Mark. He was the smallest of them all and made up for it with a twinge of aggression. But the neighbor with the dog just ignored him. Apparently, he already knew who the leader was. One more moment, and he got Archie's arm. So the kid howled in pain. I see your parents made a mistake in your upbringing. In a quiet, commanding, and steely voice, the strange neighbor said, but that's how I remember them. You know that only losers with complexes who are nothing of themselves attack defenseless people in a mob. Archie Hanna, and honestly trying to free himself from a powerful grip. You don't know who you're messing with. Oh, believe me, I know perfectly well, grinned the boy. Your grandfather, Gregory Stone, is like this. Director of a summer camp for troubled teens. I know him, and I think he'll be thrilled that I'm going to tell him about you and show him. I videotaped the whole thing. You're lying, Archie muttered, but he wasn't sure. You didn't videotape anything. You're just intimidating me. You're risking a test. The neighbor raised an eyebrow. Here's the thing, guys. I know where you live, and me and Lulu. He nodded at the sheepdog. We ain't afraid of that kind. And we can give each and every one of you a hard time. But I also know you can't be rehabilitated so easily until you've had a good thrashing. They won't let you pass like the flu through the center. So I'm not gonna lecture you on the nature of good and evil. I just need you all to apologize to this young miss and stay away from her. I see. 2 of the gang protested languidly, but Archie, whose shoulder looked like it was about to pop out of joint, yelled at them to do as the man ordered. I apologize with a sour face, Mark said. Behind him, 2 more kids repeated the same. Finally, Archie himself apologized to Molly. The free neighbor let go of the bully so sharply that he almost fell, and then, accompanied by his henchman, looking back with a mixture of fright and shame, Archie ran away. How are you? Asked the neighbor to Molly, who was still sitting on the pavement among the slop. Thank you, the girl mumbled. Give me your hand. He held out his palm to her, and she leaned up. Alex Milton. He introduced himself. Molly, she said, and then added, but that's it. My name is Molly. Alex repeated, thoughtfully, as if tasting her name is very beautiful and unusual. You are not Native American. I'm from Russia, answered the girl. My mom moved here a long time ago. And ours kicked our nose out. Thank you very much. Oh, she swayed slightly. She was dizzy. She must have been nervous. Also, her forehead felt oddly wet for some reason. And his tentacles. Molly ran her hand over her skin, looked at her fingers, and gasped. The tips were stained scarlet. Are you hurt? Alex exclaimed. And before Molly could react, he reached for her, brushing her bangs off the girl's forehead. Damn it. Well, who did it? He hissed angrily. They didn't touch me, she hastily explained. For some reason, suddenly for the passage, for the safety of the bullies. If this type with the features of the terrible night decides to find them, chase them down, and will undoubtedly succeed in doing so. Buck fell out of Buck with everything else. She nodded down at the shards of glass jar, the sharp edge of one of which had ridden over Molly's head. You need to go to the hospital, Alex said. Let's call your parents. He frowned when she shook her head. I live with my mom, my dad doesn't. Then we should call your mom. Phone. Or shall we walk you to your apartment? No, sir. I mean Alex, Molly smiled shyly. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you, but I really don't need to go to the hospital. Molly wasn't aware of this. Should there be free care in cases like this? I guess even without insurance, she wouldn't have been kicked out the door. But even more than that, as creepy as it was to admit it, she didn't care about her own person. Lately, she had been perceived as aloof, as if she were a doll with arms and legs, capable of representing the primitive life of a human being. Molly looked around absent-mindedly. The trash would certainly be picked up now. But how to get home like this? Mom would ask questions, and Molly would rather go under than tell her what had happened. She must have gotten that look on her face, because Alex suddenly said, "Let me help you out here. And then are you afraid to go home?" As you guessed, she squinted. Actually, he chuckled. You just whispered under your breath. What's Mom gonna say? But she did. She shrugged and started picking up the trash. Why did you bother? Water. Distracted, Alex smiled. It was a spontaneous act of anger. From individuals with nothing better to do. Or do you have a serious conflict? When you go to the police, will I be a witness? No. Molly's eyes went wide. She turned pale. Not to the police. Okay, he replied, after a moment of ruling between them awkwardly in silence. No police. So you've recently moved here? She asked, to keep the conversation going. Lulu and I are going to live here now. At least for a while. Would you bow with your foot, sir? The girl said shyly. I don't want it to get more sore from fiddling with me. It doesn't hurt much anymore. Alex answered. But the doctor says that you have to use the cane for at least another year. The compound fracture broke like a lollipop. Pardon the details of the cough. He awkwardly. No, it's fine. I sympathize. Molly smiled shyly as the trash was collected, and they stood up. An awkward silence hung between them again. I'm not really a janitor, Molly said. I mean, I don't do it all the time. I want to go to college. Good choice, smiled Alex in a friendly way. And about working as a trash hauler or something like that. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Trust me, it's normal. Ashamed. Worth it for the likes of Archie and his accomplices. Yeah, I know. The girl averted her eyes. But I'm going to go, stop. He caught her arm. Gently, but firmly. Your wound. If you don't want to go to the hospital, you should at least have it treated. Do you know what I mean? Molly's lips trembled. She wanted to say that she understood and wasn't stupid. She could also say that she didn't have a first aid kit at home and didn't have the money to go to the drugstore and buy what she needed. because Mr. Jones wasn't due for his paycheck for another week. In the meantime, she and her mom were living on what was left in the fridge. What about going to the minister or asking for a loan? He wouldn't say no, that's for sure. But for Molly, it was unbearably shameful, because only last month and the month before last she borrowed from Mr. 3 times, and he, when she returned the debt, all waved away, said you need more girl than pay back when you get back on your feet, and he kept paying her wages. Molly's lips trembled, and she blinked often from tears. Alex sighed to him. Not everything, but quite a lot was clear from this girl. She's clearly in a tight spot, and she doesn't feel like going home right now. Naturally, she feels just plain disgusted. After what happened, that's what Alex said. How about you come to my place? I have a first aid kit, and I know first aid. Why don't you tell me what happened? We'll drink sodas, eat pizza. You sound like a maniac. Luring the girl to put her in the basement, Molly blurted it out without thinking. How insensitive is it to say that to the man who saved you from a gang of hooligans? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't understand. But Alex, to her amazement, did not take offense, but laughed. Good girl. In general, to strangers, even if they are your neighbor's home, is better not to go so trustingly, right? He got serious. But if you believe me, I can promise you I'm definitely safe. And let's switch to you already. There was a contradiction in his words, or maybe the shadow of some strange joke, but Molly had a calming effect. All right, Sir Alex, but I'm going home first. I'm sick of the smell. And she's wrinkling her nose, and I'll be honest. And then I'll come to you, and we'll talk. Then I'm waiting, Alex nodded, taking the stairs of the house from the front door, with her key and padding with her mouse to the bathroom, and then to her room. Molly felt so stupid, really. For a 16-year-old teenage girl, you can hardly think of an activity more reckless than going. Eating pizza and getting to know her neighbor's stranger, even though he has a cute dog. The dog has nothing to do with it. Molly, even as she listened to the hairdryer, remembered an American maniac who had a charming collie dog and sometimes pretended to be sick, appealing to the pity of his gullible victims. Stupid, Molly said to herself, gathering her hair into a bun with a velvet elastic band. Changing into a warm, loose tracksuit, the girl dashed backward toward the front door from the large room that served as their mother's living room and bedroom. There came the latter's clear snoring. Here I am, Molly said cheerfully. 10 minutes later, the girl appeared on Alex's doorstep, holding a pack of chocolate chip cookies still unopened. That's what's important for dessert. She smiled shyly as she held out the sweet gift. Thank you, with the Kosovo flavor, as if pleased Alex. Come on in. His house was nice, but it felt nice. The man had moved in recently and hadn't settled in yet. Boxes of bags. At the girl's feet, she jumped out and started sniffing. Hey, good girl. Molly squatted down with both hands and began scratching and stroking the cheerful muzzle, which the sheepdog was terribly pleased. What kind of pizza shall we order? What do you think about Havana? Asked Alex. Great, agreed Molly. The soda in the fridge is a treat, he said, already switching to dictating the order to the operator. Walking into the kitchen, Molly pulled out a drink. 2 cans. She went back into the room and sat on the edge of the couch. Raise your hand, please, said Alex, sitting down next to her. He was holding a first aid kit. Yes, I washed it with soap and water, Molly replied. It's not enough. You don't want an infection or an ugly scar, do you? He hummed. And when she removed her hair, he quickly and easily treated the affected areas and applied a bandage. I think you could use this, Alex added. Tapped his finger on the box he tucked everything he used into. Thank you, Molly extended. It was clearly charity, and she was creeped out. How embarrassing. You bet. A man who can't buy what he needs at the drugstore. It's a walking disgrace. Another awkward pause was saved by the doorbell ringing, delivering a pizza puppy. How hard was it for Molly not to gorge herself on food? No, it wasn't that she and her mom were starving. But Nancy had just bought a mountain of canned pork and beans in one sauce with her last welfare payment, so ate pretty much just that interspersed with pasta and onion over a roast and crisped with the best sweet or savory. There was also tea and coffee in the house. In general, the diet did not shine refinement of flavors and balance. "Are you a military man?" suddenly asked Molly, when there was less than half of the pizza left in the silent treat. She noticed the photo card on the coffee table. Alex in a U.S. Army uniform, and another guy in the same one, standing side by side and smiling widely, with Lulu sitting at their feet. Alex's ex snickered. How many times had he been asked that question? And he'd been provided with different answers, mostly brief, polite ones, but ones that made it clear to the interlocutor that he didn't want to talk more on the subject. And then there was the truth, the one that changed a lot of things in his views on the world, the one that made him renounce a lot of things that seemed once the only true. He knew the girl only a little. She was essentially nothing to him. But somehow, suddenly with her, he realized what he wanted. He just had to tell the real truth that only a few people had ever been able to hear from him. And Alex spoke. He was born into a family of hereditary military men who had chosen this way since the war for the independence of the United States of America. And it was very rare for a family to go against tradition. But such a person was Alex's father, who decided that his vocation was big business, and he succeeded in it. He made a lot of money, and then almost lost everything. A few years ago, when Alex was a little more than 20 years old, his father died of cancer, and before his death he asked his son to join the army because family and its heritage is important. Alex had already graduated from university at that point. He wanted to be a chef. That was his dream. But he also gave his father his word. And so instead of the kitchens of Paris and Rome, Bangkok, and Mexico City, he ended up in the U.S. Army and on to the Mexican border. I thought that was cool. I had some good guys with me, with a sad smile, Alex said. The work was not easy. Every now and then we had to stop attempts to get across the border. These were illegal immigrants, and often it was about families who ran after the American dream, women, children, and sometimes old men, grown men. They gave the last of their money to dubious middlemen to help them cross the border as they hoped to live on the other side, all in different ways. But there were many dangers along the way. One was that these people risked falling into the hands of modern-day slave traders. We've had to deal with these cases, Alex said thoughtfully. Hardly anyone here thinks about what goes on out there. But soon I realized it can't be like that anymore. The thing is that Alex started to notice some strange things over time, as if some of the army chiefs were playing for the wrong team. Not that they cooperated directly with the bandits, but as if they turned a blind eye to a lot of things, not wanting to create unnecessary troubles for themselves. But no one listened to Alex, and at some point he was told to shut up. And then one day it became known to him that a group of illegal immigrants, mostly women and children, were going to cross the border. About 20 people, and actually in cooperation with the state police. The U.S. military had to prevent it, and then contact Mexican authorities to take care of their people. But suddenly the plans changed, and Alex, not willing to take anyone's word for it this time, decided to do a little investigation of his own. And he was horrified, because it turned out that these people at some point, while they were still on the territory of America, were going to be attacked by bandits belonging to a Mexican clan who were going to take them into slavery. Naturally, Alex rushed to his superiors. He tried to tell them that plans had to be changed immediately. People had to be rescued. "It's the Mexicans, son," the chief told him, a big military man sitting behind a desk in his luxurious office. "We take care to keep them out of our America. What do you care what happens to them next? Let them go home. And if something happens to them on the way back, well," did the commander smirk. They knew there were hungry quarters in the desert. They were idiots themselves. Alex was horrified at such cynicism and rage. This was coming from a man who called himself a great patriot of America and a fighter for its ideals of freedom. So how could he be so damn cruel to those unfortunate people who only by the entanglements of life had rushed after phantom dreams to a supposedly hospitable America? Alex knew that he must obey the order, but he also knew that he could not sleep peacefully afterward, having allowed such a misfortune to happen. And so, accompanied by his friend, the man from the photo, his name was Mike, Alex, under the cover of night, went into the desert. They found them, caught up with members of a Mexican crime syndicate, who were already preparing to load the frightened people into a truck. They told them they were under arrest. And then there was a fight with the Americans. There was a dog named Lulu. She too fought against the villains. But Lulu was badly wounded. And as a result, no matter how hard they tried afterward, the vet's deafened LO in one ear suffered then, saving the dog and its owner. Alex and Mike were not idiots, realized that alone here nothing cannot be solved to the end. That's why they called the migration police, as well as the FBI, and soon the help arrived. Unfortunately, almost all the bandits managed to escape, and the rest were seriously wounded and said they would sue the American army for shooting them, and in general, not just try to stop them, but beat them up heartily. But Alex and his friend were ready to go to the end. In fact, they didn't expect to be declared heroes, or to be even grateful. They just did what they had to do. But it came as a real shock to everyone. The fact that they, it turns out, now became even more guilty of having left the base unauthorized, attacked the citizens of Mexico. Alex and the boys were told that they were in big trouble, that they were going to be court-martialed. They were told they shouldn't have gotten involved, that they were interfering with some big investigation, and that if the bandits hadn't been spooked, it would eventually be possible to get to their big bosses. But Alex didn't see it that way. How could one know what was going on and not interfere? Call, allowing innocent people to be taken like cattle and sold like cattle. He was shocked, and for some reason he didn't believe that the Mexican authorities would have released the captives. But later, and then Alex thought, even if they would have released them later, what could have happened to defenseless children and women in the meantime? It was scary to think about. In general, the situation was the most difficult and gloomy. But suddenly, it turned out that Mike had some very good big connections. As a result, the friends went to a special agreement with the authorities. They tell everything they know about this human trafficking story, and they get almost nothing for it. But Alex, as the main instigator, had to leave the army. And he agreed because he was ready to resign. Disappointed with the U.S. Army, his friend Mike, who was an army doctor, said he was going to retire too, just a little while before he retired. Alex spent the next few years traveling around hospitals. Many doctors said he wouldn't be able to walk at all, but there were those who took on the difficult fracture. Work as a cook, of course, he could not, but he managed to run a cooking block, which brought some money. And then there were the payments from the fund left by my father, almost all of which went to terribly expensive medical treatment. This house used to belong to my father, Alex said. He started by selling real estate, but he lived in this house himself, so he never sold it to anyone. It was a memory of when he was young, when my mom was still alive. Alex looked Molly in the eye. She died in childbirth. "I'm sorry for your loss," she answered, quietly, and thought about the fact that no matter how hard it was for her, but just how lucky she was to have her mom. True, she didn't have a father as caring as Alex, so they were kind of alike. Neither of them had a full family, and yet they were so different. How did your family take it when you left the army? They know what happened. Not everyone knows, and not everyone has accepted. Grinned sadly, Alex. We don't talk much. I don't blame them. It's the way it is. Sometimes you need to separate from your family, but still be a part of it. It's hard to explain. Well, now he waved his hand and glanced at the last slice of pizza in the box, moving it over to Molly. "Here you go. I don't have much of an appetite. Now I just want to figure out what to do next. I want to get my leg all sorted out. And then maybe I'll sell the house after all. My dad said it's up to me. I'm gonna go work as a chef after all." Or maybe I'll open my own restaurant in Florida, just for tourists and locals. Nothing fancy. I want to be able to do a little more of everything myself. Something homemade, you know. Molly nodded. She talked to a lot of people, of course, and to her neighbors, but she had never had such frank conversations with anyone, except Mr. He often spoke of times past when he was a boy living with his father and grandfather in Hong Kong. And Lisa, she was an old lady, an immigrant neighbor from Poland, who still spoke almost no English. Molly often dropped by to help with the cooking. Mom, by the way, didn't approve of these visits, but Molly didn't care. Lisa was partly a substitute for her own grandmother, whom Molly had never known. And now, sitting next to Alex, scratching Lulu behind the ear, Molly talked about what was troubling her, what she was living. She opened up to him about how she'd had high hopes, and then everything had crumbled. How difficult it was now, and how sometimes it seemed to her that there was only the blackness of hopelessness ahead. You and I have been betrayed in some way by the system that we believed was supposed to protect law and order in America, Alex muttered. Drink. He gently touched Molly's chin with his fingers, lifting her head and meeting her gaze again. But life goes on, you know. We don't have to give up. It can still be okay. I'd like to believe it would. Sadly, the girl smiled. They talked some more about little things, like how Lulu likes to play in the dog park, and what the town was like in the olden days. And among other things, Molly mentioned that she and her mom had once been to a traveling circus. I've never been there, Alex said, but everyone seems to say the same as you, that it's something magical. I think we should go. The traveling circus, but they've disappeared. But some of them are still traveling. Alex smiled. The ghost moon has come to us. We have a traveling circus in town. Molly gasped. And you missed this news. Alex raised his eyebrows. They've put up a tent in the parking lot on the outskirts of the city. They've been here since a week, and they'll be here a little longer. Look, his eyes are screwed up. Why don't we go together tomorrow night? Yeah, it'll be fun, he added, noticing Molly's hesitation. This invitation was like a gust of fresh breeze for her. Really, what else to do after Yuli's shift, sitting around all evening, listening to the TV blaring? Nancy liked to have a quiz night. This was not at all to be desired, so Molly decided to be cheeky. Tomorrow, she would ask Mr. Lee for a couple of $dozen in advance, just enough for a ticket and something to eat at the circus. Deal, she said. Alex. When Molly got home, she did the same thing she always did to make dinner. Took care of her mom. And then, plucking up her courage, looked through the stack of emails about overdue bills and sorted them into 3 piles. Resolve urgently, probably be able to negotiate an installment plan. And something that could be ignored for tomorrow for now. She had to get up early. So Molly decided to go to bed early. And what was surprising this time, she wasn't even disturbed by the loud sound of the TV. And the dream she had that night was amazingly strange. Molly saw herself as beautiful. And judging by the look of the people around her, her own specially styled hair, it was the 1930s. She was a horsewoman in a sequined red dress rushing on horseback through the arena of a traveling circus, and the audience squealed with delight. And then her horse was lifted up under the very dome of the tent, and there they had to walk on a thin rope. And in Molly's dream, it seemed to be business as usual. She went, rubbed at the horse with her heels against its flanks. But the mare suddenly reared up, gave a shrill neigh, and Molly realized in horror, someone had cut the insurance, and if they started to fall, they would crash. Terrified, she whirled her head around. For some reason, the lights in the circus began to kick, 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 and the screams of the audience were replaced by some kind of evil laughter. And suddenly, Molly saw the circus owner below her. For some reason, today he was dressed as a clown, except that the expression on his mask was unkind, and the colors on it were split. It was as if they were trying to wash them off with a dirty rag. Suddenly, there was a deafening silence, and then a merry circus tune played, which sent goosebumps down to the bones. and then a bright beam of light was directed at the clown. And then he threw up his arms, and they extended for many meters, attempted to grab Molly the horse, which was desperately flailing from side to side, on the tiny platform under the dome, risking to fall off at any moment. "Gerda, stop, look out," shouted Molly, realizing that if the crazy clown grabbed them, they would be finished. Then his hands closed around Molly's leg and dragged her down. She screamed and woke up. It was already shining outside the window. The sun must be in a nightmare. She thrashed around because the alarm clock appeared to have been dropped on the floor and her feet were tangled in the blanket. "It's okay. It's just a dream," mumbled to herself under her breath. Molly walked to the bathroom for now, where she splashed cold water in her face for a long time and then brushed her teeth twice. The taste of roasted peanuts and cotton candy stuck in her mouth just a little bit, reading the entire space in a nightmare. The circus. Well, of course, she just now remembered that she and Alex had agreed to go there tonight. Might as well back out. That's another silly thing to say out loud, Molly thought to herself, deciding that in a couple hours the aftertaste of the bad dream would dissipate and they'd have a good time, and she'd have plenty of cotton candy and peanuts. Make breakfast for Mom and make sure she takes all her meds. Nancy has been grumbling lately that she is hopeless and all this fiddling is for nothing. Elena's getting ready for work. Is it a good day? She smiled as she walked through the door of the store. The bells hanging above her bent habitually. "What's up?" Molly asked, alarmed. Mr. Lee, his wife. And there were two of their relatives here. You could see everyone had been crying recently. Master Song's wife whipped around and held out her arms to Molly. In a breaking voice, she announced that their daughter were missing. "How is missing?" shocked, Molly asked. It turned out that the night before last hadn't come home. She had been let out for a walk with her friends. They were girls from well-known neighboring families. They were going to see a traveling circus, and they had a good time there. Even sent her parents a picture on her phone. Here she is standing at the shooting gallery holding her prize-winning plush panda. And then at some point, the girls split up. 2 went to the fortune-telling tent, and 3, which included us, went to the mirror maze, and she didn't come out of it. The friends first thought that we were thought to pass this frightening attraction with crooked mirrors once again, and when she got held up, they tried to call her, but she couldn't get through. The girls, offended the whole circus, asked its employees and other guests. Then they turned to their parents, and those already went to their parents. They called all the acquaintances, and in the morning they turned to the police. They said my girl must have run away from home on her own. In a colorless voice, Song recounted. They said teenagers do that a lot. But our kind or not, she could never run away with any guy. She was learning my sweet, kind Weor. It was only yesterday evening that the police deigned to take a missing girl report. And that was only after Mr. Lee reminded them that his daughter was a minor. The cops went to the circus, talked to everyone there, including its owner, one Fred, nicknamed the Laughing Ghost Clown. Yes, the circus owner was also its main clown, and his act closed each show. Fred expressed sympathy and added that his circus, his brainchild, pricelessly different with an impeccable reputation, and this whole investigation could interfere with his business. So unless the police had a warrant for all this activity, they'd better not interfere with the show, and especially not hold up Ghost Moon any longer at all, because the circus was planning to leave for another city soon. And I thought they'd be with us for a long time, Molly said. Strolling circuses don't have to keep promises. Minister Lee shook his head. I guess they can't collect much here. So they're in a hurry to go where the public will like them better. Molly, my dear, the elderly Chinese man shook her hand warmly. The store is not open today, so you have the day off. With another expression of sympathy, Molly went outside. The good mood was washed away like rain. She had always been her best friend. And what could have happened to her in such a crowded place? Molly absent-mindedly walked home. Where else was there to go if the workday was canceled, when suddenly, walking through the alleys, she suddenly noticed a strange picture. Actually, There was nothing strange about meeting one of those bully boys. Molly would have preferred to leave as soon as possible to avoid being seen by them. But right now she was witnessing a strange sight. Archie's brother was standing in the alley, pounding his fists into the brick wall, swearing foully. "Hey, are you crazy?" Molly threw herself at the boy, grabbing his arm. Knuckles cracked. Marks on the wall. Kids had some serious healing time. "Are you doing this?" And she, grabbing him by the shoulders now, turned him around to face her and gave him a gentle shake. If Molly were asked what she was doing right now, she wouldn't be able to answer. Why would she even care about the man who, along with the others, was bullying her? But maybe the point was that this person was still, in fact, young, only 12 years old, and the fact that in his scolding, interspersed with his sobs, you could hear the genuine desperation of a man whose life had suffered something terrible. Mark froze, rounding his eyes, clearly shocked by her interference. "None of your business," he shouted and pulled out of her arms. "Leave me alone." At the last words, the boy cried again and began rubbing his eyes angrily with his fists. Archie's brother. Brother is missing, and no one cares. A vague bad feeling stirred in Molly's chest. "What do you mean Mark's missing?" Looked at her Volchenko from the underlying stocking schmug bet nose and spoke. It turned out that 2 days ago, Archie went on a date with his school girlfriend to a traveling circus. And there they had a falling out. He thought she was flirting with a magician. They went their separate ways. Then the girlfriend decided to reconcile, but she couldn't find Archie. It was like he'd vanished. She ran around the circus until it closed, but all she could find was his cell phone. He'd dropped it by the old cages. They used to hold tigers and other animals. But ever since the Animal Welfare Act banned traveling circuses, they've been empty, and now only animal figures made of papier-mâché and fake fur sat in the cages in the ghostly moon. Dad and the police think Archie's in trouble, so he ran away. He'll do time and come back. Mark finished the story, but he didn't. He was stolen by an evil clown. What clown? Re-questioned Molly, who had a bad feeling. Already it had gained, tickling and icy paws. Getting to her neck, "This circus be damned." In a colorless voice and looking past her, Mark replied, "It's been going on for 100 years, but nobody cares." Wait, she had to intercept his hand again. But this time, Mark didn't lash out and quickly calmed down. "I'm fine." "You can't be fine," Molly said. "What the hell is going on? First Mylan, now your brother. Who's us or my friend?" She disappeared the day before yesterday. She was at the circus too. So that's proof. Mark opened his eyes wide. He was breathing hard and looked a little crazy. "I'm right, but no one believes me. Hardly anyone believes an evil clown stealing his teenagers," Molly said thoughtfully, but immediately frowned. Her mother loved to watch crime shows, and you'd be privy to all sorts of nasty stuff that shook America from time to time. So Molly could say that crazy clowns existed in reality too, but in their quiet little town and in plain sight in a traveling circus. "You told that to the police," said Mark, pressed his lips together. They laughed. "My father said I should see a doctor." "But it's true." That's how Molly sighed. "To begin with, you do need to see a doctor. You've seen your hands. You need a ride home." "What am I, a little kid?" "You think this is a circus, Mark." But he looked kind of scared. "If there are missing teenagers in town, I'd be careful walking around." "You walk alone." "Makes sense," Molly chuckled. "It's just that there are no counselors." "Who needs me?" "By the way, I'm the one Mark slapped." Awkward. "I think I owe you another apology for that incident." "Are you forgiven?" Molly replied. "Let's go." "Do you happen to have a first aid kit at home?" "Careful," asked Mark. "How will my mother see me like this?" "She'll realize you're hurt anyway," Molly remarked. "But of course, it looks very picturesque now. And I have a bird. But my mom doesn't like visitors, but I think I know who we can visit." In general, Molly doubted that it was a good idea to drag the kid without asking to Alex, who had shaken him up yesterday. But what else was there to do? And at the same time, Molly decided to tell him that she didn't want to go to the traveling circus anymore, even if there are no evil clowns in nature. But still, after what happened, it was misfortune to misfortunes. Alex was surprised, but at the door to the guests did not indicate Lulu's place, pulled back the dog, which sounded on the boy. Mark, clearly embarrassed at the state and who he had come to see, volunteered to handle his own hands. But after nearly knocking over the bottle, Agnes on the couch, Alex told him to sit still and quickly deftly covered both hands under bandages. Pizza like a mouse was not offered, but brought 3 cans of fruit soda from the refrigerator. Molly excitedly recounted what had happened, and I knew they wouldn't stop at one person. They always do, Mark blurted out. Look, I understand what's going on with you, Molly said. But to believe it seriously. Wait a minute, said Alex. He looked at Mark carefully. Can you explain in detail? What's the story with the damned circus? What do you believe him? Molly rolled her eyes. Boy. Meanwhile, with hands trembling with pain and excitement, he unzipped his school backpack and pulled out a folder, opened it, and dumped it on the coffee table. Calculus scholarly notes, worksheets, and copies of some ancient newspaper articles. Here Mark began to explain, going through his wealth. Last year, we were assigned to write something on the history of the city. I thought it would be cool to make the subject the 1920s, jazz and gangsters and all that. And then I found this. I poked my finger into the yellowed from Time, or rather, his copy of the newspaper. It was an article that told of the disappearance of the 2 children of 14-year-old twin sisters April and Peggy. They had disappeared in 1925 when they had gone on a holiday to the fairgrounds, and there was a traveling circus nearby. It's not the only case. It's hard. Mark several times a year where this circus showed up, and people disappeared, almost always teenagers. No trace of them was ever found. The police would close the cases, but there's an urban legend. Mark looked around at his listeners, all 3 of them, because Lulu was sitting on Fauchette's point as if she could understand something. The legend said that the Ghost Moon Circus was once not cursed, and even on the contrary, it was the best. People smiled, cheered, and became kinder wherever its performers went, and even the lions and tigers in it were remarkably intelligent and docile. They never bit the trainers. In those good times, the first owner and founder of the circus was Albert Schwartz, a German-born magician. He was lonely, no wife, no children. He saw the circus as his child and the meaning of his life. And then love came into his life. She became a beautiful acrobat, Sabrina. But here's the trouble. She joined the circus not alone, but together with her husband tamer of predators named Jack. Jack was a sweet, but just plain saintly guy, and he didn't notice the romance that had erupted between Sabrina and the owner. However, a sense of duty prevented Sabrina from finally leaving Jack. The poor woman tossed between the voice of reason and the voice of the heart. Albert suffered too. And then one day in one town he met an old woman. She was said to be a great fortune teller and a real sorceress too. Albert asked her to join the circus, but she said that tricks and jokes were too small for her, that she served other forces. I can see the weight on your heart, she told Albert as he was about to leave. I can help you if you are willing to pay the price the darkness will exact for the fulfillment of your wish. Albert was ready for all the gold. He had money. Maybe he should give it all up and become like an ordinary farmer. Maybe he should renounce his trade to get the love of his life. No, you fool. The old woman laughed. Let your circus live on. It's better that way. You'll have your beautiful artist, and you'll be together. But know that if you voluntarily lose what was yours, there will be a reckoning. And then not only you, but your descendants will pay tribute until the end of time. Then the old woman performed some terrible magic-filled ritual. Albert returned to the circus. He was full of bright hopes. After all, he hadn't wished for anything bad. He just wanted love. But at the circus, he got some terrible news. A tiger had attacked Jack. Sabrina was a widow. But Albert too. Pogor loved the glorious worker. He quickly consoled her, and they played a wedding. True, many artists and circus workers said that it was too hasty. It was not all to the good. Everything was fine for a few months, and every show drew crowds. Then two things happened. Albert, who now had a family, was seriously thinking about his health and decided to go to the doctor to make sure his children would be healthy. He was worried because many men in his family had heart problems, and it could be hereditary. But at that clinic, they told him that he had no heart problems, but he did have a problem having an heir. The doctors did some tests and said Albert was infertile. How sad he was to return to the circus, and there was happy news waiting for him. Sabrina told him she was pregnant. They were going to have a baby soon. It hadn't been that long since she'd been widowed. Albert thought, so there could be a baby. And it's definitely Jack's. You wretch. Albert was furious. It's not my baby. I disown him, and I disown you too, you filthy wench. That same evening, there was to be a performance. Sabrina was doing her signature act, flying under the dome of the tent. And it so happened that she must not have checked her safety harness properly, because in an instant the girl fell off and crashed. But before her eyes closed for good, she managed to whisper, bowing, that we were all over her. Alberto is your baby. I loved only you. Why did you deny what was yours? The pain of loss was monstrous, but even blacker and more nightmarish was what Albert suddenly realized. The old woman's curse was coming true. He was being punished for accepting the help of the forces of darkness. And that very night, as legend has it, a creature appeared to the circus owner in a form so terrible that history has not preserved its description. And it's said that from now on, every few years Albert and his descendants, those who would own the circus after him, would pay tribute with human sacrifices. Mark finished the story. But how can it be like that? Molly asked. It's not like he had no children left. He adopted an orphan boy, Mark explained, and raised him as a clown. And since then, it is believed that victims are lured and sacrificed by the one who plays the role of a clown in the circus. And in this way, the circus owner pays tribute to the forces of darkness and protects his circus from ruin. That's it. Molly was overwhelmed with emotion. It was strange, but she was almost physically sickened by what she heard. And memories of her own nightmare came flooding back. It's just an urban legend, she finally said. How many of them are there? Well, yes, Mark said with a snicker. It's easy to say that until you have a loved one missing. Am I missing us, or was she my best friend? Wait a minute. Alex held up his hand. Let's keep our emotions to ourselves. All right. Now we need to pull ourselves together and decide what to do. But what can we do? Molly ran her fingers through her hair and gripped it nervously. The police are working. They have to find any mistakes. They have to find Haley and Archie. What are you doing? She asked Alex, who had opened the laptop on the coffee table and started typing rapidly. Testing some crazy theory. Give me 10 minutes. Okay. Finally, after 10 minutes, he turned the laptop screen to his guests. Alex's own face became very serious. Look, I compared the routes where the Ghost Moon Circus has performed in the last 10 years with the statistics missing persons. And what did you find out? Molly asked, already anticipating what the answer would be. Where they showed up, the missing people were teenagers between 12 and 18, sometimes someone older or younger. And actually, it could all be a coincidence. People go missing before the circus arrives and after they leave. Except in this case, each time, someone who went missing went to their show, or was just in the vicinity of the circus parking lot. For a few minutes, the small group was silent. It was broken only by Lulu. The dog retreated to her bowl of dry food. Of course, I could turn all this over to the police, said Alex thoughtfully. But as you understand, they are unlikely to like the version with a long-standing curse of a traveling circus and tales of sacrifice. But I can also try to figure it out myself. That's what I'll do. Alex stood up, and now his face expressed determination. In the evening, I'm going to the circus. I'll see how it is. I'll jump in with you. Mark, you're not going there alone, Molly exclaimed. It might be dangerous. I'm going with you. Are you? She pointed her finger at Mark. Go home and stay home tonight. Why does a girl have more right to do that than me, pouted the kid. I'm almost 17 and you're 12. So what? I'm the best Boy Scout. That's what Grandpa says. I can tie all the knots and start a fire without matches. Good for you, Alex, patting the kid on the head, but he dodged the angry wolf. But she's right. Children don't belong there. You've already helped us a lot by telling us everything. And you. All right. Alex nodded to Molly. But you'll stay out of sight and go away and call the cops if I tell you to. Deal. Molly nodded. Mark glared resentfully, but obediently went to his room. Before going to the circus, Molly had to go home and feed her mother dinner. Where do I disappear all day long? Nancy asked resentfully. Yes, the girl answered evasively. Just different things to do. You probably sleep and see how you can become an adult as soon as possible. And then I'll be thrown into an asylum for the handicapped. He hissed to Nancy, rising from the bed. She froze, barely leaning on Hodinka, while her daughter changed the bedclothes for clean ones. Don't be silly, Molly replied tiredly. I'm not going to leave you. That's what I believed, Nancy grinned. If you became an invalid and I had a chance to start over. She stopped talking abruptly. What are you, a mom? Molly V knocked down a pillow, straightened up, and met her gaze. You threw me out. Nancy, I, pursing my lips, turned away. It looked like she was about to cry. You know, you already did, didn't you? Mom said to the girl when she brought Stephen home. You didn't care that there was an ex-con, a grown, strange man living next to your teenage daughter. You know, Mom, I'm sorry you had an accident, but I guess it was fate's price for you to finally realize how gullible you were. Okay, I'm settled. Go to bed. Go to sleep. Where are you going? Nancy stretched out in a completely different tone. She lay down and now began to make herself comfortable. Where are you going at night, daughter? I'm going out with a friend, shouted Molly already from the corridor. Threw on over the net dress, jeans, her jacket. Daughter, don't go, came the voice of Nancy's mother. She was crying again. Don't leave me alone. What friend? Don't go anywhere. Stay. Molly tried not to listen to it. She left the apartment, locked the door on the key beside her mother. The phone was left on the table. A thought flashed. If she didn't come back, if all this nonsense with the circus curse and the clown maniacs turned out to be true, Mom could call the landlord to open the door from the other side. Hold on, or am I going to go looking? Molly whispered, heading downstairs. Just 2 steps later, the entryway door swung open. She stepped out into the street. The air was noticeably cooler. Scents that spoke of the imminent fall were carried in it. The sun was already touching the horizon in a ruby scarlet ball. Preparing to duck behind the mountain range, Molly smiled. A perfect evening to go to the traveling circus and get as full of cotton candy and roasted peanuts as the last time. If Molly had come here for any other purpose, just to have a good time, she would have gasped with delight from the first step into the world of Ghost Moon. Holding hands, she and Alex walked through a gate that depicted the giant open mouth of a werewolf, who glared at every visitor with light bulb eyes and laughed ominously. Lulu was against her custom. She was an obedient, intelligent dog and needed no restraints whatsoever. She was out now, nodding at her master's feet on a leash. It had to be. That was why she seemed so tense to Molly. Or the dog felt angry. Not that Molly was ready to actually believe the stupid scare story, but something evil was definitely going on. Strawberry or vanilla? Alex's question brought her out of her reverie. They stopped at a tent selling cotton candy. Strawberry was Molly's answer. What, she noted after a moment. To say the least, and they make a good one here. It's the best I've ever had in my life. Circuses like this used to be sometimes the only entertainment in the provinces. Alex, bearded women, snake men. The heaviest man was a female mermaid, and there were all sorts of outlandish ones. Some were real, of course. A developmentally disabled person, he sighed. But there were even more who could skillfully pretend. My great-grandfather loved going to one of the last of these circuses, but it wasn't a ghost moon. Molly asked. No, smiled Alex. Something, I think, much safer about a shooting gallery. Do you want to win something for you, or shall we go? Find out from the fortune teller. What's in store for us? I'm not amused. I'm not saying it's funny. He lowered his voice, but we have to start somewhere. You think this is even real? The police were probably looking all over the place. Who knows? Shook his head Alex Lulu. What do you think? He sat down in front of the dog and with a deft magician's movement, took out of his pocket and shoved a rag under his nose. What is it? Molly asked Wanda. It's Archie's. Mark gave off his scent. Lulu might be able to pick up the trail. Although here in so many days, of course, all interrupted by other odors, shook his head Alex. But if my theory turns out to be correct. What theory? Molly couldn't even guess how they could try to be detectives here, other than just walking around, hoping for a lucky break. You've heard of the fact that when a person is really scared, their body releases specific fear hormones. They say that's why you can't be afraid. If you meet a cunning beast, he just smells it and will realize that you are weak, that you are a willing victim. Molly nodded. She had heard something like that. And Alex continued. Turns out it wasn't just the gang she was on Archie the day the guy went missing. She was on him at the moment when the brother's father came home and gave the eldest nobody. I mean Archie a big scandal for taking money without asking. He threatened to send his son to a camp for troubled teens, and Archie was very scared. I don't think he was scared when he first came here with his girlfriend. The guy expected to have a good time tonight. Alex finally revealed his idea. But when something bad happened to him, he was probably scared. And you think we should look for the smell of fear? Molly gasped. You're a good thinker. Alex winked cheerfully at her. The cops took from the guy's parents some of his clothes and gave them to the search dogs. But it was probably something ordinary. But Bogdan Archie left it in his room. He decided that he needed to look cool for his girlfriend tonight and decided, as Mark said, to style his hair in the style of the 60s. It's a trend right now among young people. But you know, it started in the front. Anyway, that's what I want Lulu to try looking for. I want her to look for someone who is not just a guy, but someone who is literally imbued with fear. I don't know how possible that is, but there's a chance that's why the dogs haven't found anything before. Lulu girl, what do you say? Let's get to work. Sheepdog, hitherto noisily inhaling the one her canine creature, him available scents, poked loudly, pulling away from the bondage. Alex stood up, tucking the stuff back into his pocket. Look for it, he told Lulu, and she pulled them into the depths of the circus. It was basically a jumble of individual, mottled striped tents, with mobile drink and snack stands moving between them, as well as huge inflatable figures depicting characters that celebrated the ghostly moon. 10 years ago, Molly, when passing by one of these figures, had wondered how it was that none of the boys had ever gotten the hooligan idea of stabbing one of these figures with a needle. Or had they? That must have been fun. Serves them all right, she thought. If these circus performers had anything to do with the disappearance of Thought and Archie, the sheepdog deftly maneuvered among the strollers across the huge field the circus occupied. Alex and Molly followed her. But suddenly, Lulu slowed down and stared at one spot of the marquee labeled "No Trespassing Bill Bear's Property." You think it was her, she exhaled excitedly to Molly, and clung tighter to Alex's arm. She dropped the cotton candy somewhere along the way, but she'd already forgotten about it. I have no idea, but I don't think it could be any worse. If I ask this Mr. Bill, Alex said thoughtfully. After all, I don't think anyone here would be surprised that people ask such questions. The reporters here are probably sick of asking questions. Freud forbids us to talk to the press. A rough voice came from behind them. The whole trio turned around and raised their heads because the man in front of them was more than 2 meters tall. It was a man about 40 years old, dressed in pull-on striped tights, bald as an egg, but with a lush, long mustache. He stood with his arms folded across his chest, looking wary, threatening. At the same time, he asked Alex. The former private border guard answered Todd calmly and did not look away. And she is definitely not a cop. Verzilla grinned. Did you pass on a child's ticket? Little girl. Actually, I'm almost 17. Molly took a chance. Your brother shouldn't let you meddle in adult affairs. The big guy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He's not my brother, said Molly. We're just friends. Good friends squinted at the man in tights. Reliable friends. Otherwise you wouldn't risk coming here together, knowing what they say about this place. And here Molly realized on her own skin what the expression meant. Her heart sank into her heels. She looked around, and there are plenty of people around. They can't be in danger right now, can they? Although for missing mine at Archie's, this place wasn't safe at all. Let's talk out of earshot. The big guy nodded at the tent. My name is Bill, and I think we can be of use to each other. The tent turned out to be a cramped and motley dressing table, retro-style posters, a few soft peaks on the walls, a rug on the floor and pillows scattered about, some huge weights and a barbell. Part of the show, Bill explained. People are interested in looking at how the stars' real lives in the trailer. They're behind the park. He waved his hand to have a seat. He set the example by sitting right down on the floor. I don't offer you anything to drink, because you wouldn't risk it anyway. You don't know me, right? He grinned. Molly and Alex looked at each other, but they accepted the invitation and sat down. Alex unhooked the leash from Lulu's collar. Your dog is looking at me strangely. Bill noticed her. Brought to your father the smell from the missing boy Archie's belongings. Alex answered, and Bill nodded. He looked very calm. In Molly's opinion, it is impossible to be calm for someone who could be involved in such a heinous crime as the kidnapping of teenagers. But for some reason, he didn't seem dangerous. I mean, he didn't seem dangerous. And Alex, he wouldn't be so trusting of someone who could be dangerous, would he? I'm glad you came, Bill said. This has to end, and it has to end now, while they're still alive. Luce and Archie. They're here, aren't they? Molly lunged forward, and Alex barely caught her in time. What are you doing with them? Wildcat stretched his lips in a smile. Bill has to be careful with her. And you think it's my fault? But you know, said Molly, who still wanted to claw at Bill with her bare hands and shake the truth out of him. I didn't care that he was 5 times heavier than she was and knew more and unfortunately didn't know what to do with that knowledge. But then you showed up, he said in a way he didn't understand at all. Lulu was quietly mesmerized. Then the time was right. Now here to explain what's going on. How are you involved in this? And how are we going to be damned here to save the children? Alex shouted in her tone. And Bill spoke. It was an alias in honor of the legendary enforcer of the early 20th century, Bill Grizzly. The real name of the man sitting in front of them was William. And he had joined the circus 2 months ago when Ghost Moon was passing through a town in Texas. William had left his father's farm, wanting a change of scenery after a rough divorce. At first, everything was fine. He got along well with the other performers. And the circus owner, Fred, seemed like a good-natured, fun-loving little guy. But gradually, Bill began to notice that something strange was going on at Ghost Moon. Sometimes, when they were on the road, they would stop for a while, and Fred would meet some strange people. To Bill, these types reminded him of gangsters. And one day, when he looked up the details of his act, Bill happened to notice Fred hiding a gun in a cache, and something told him that it wasn't a sham. You know, when I realized that I looked like my legendary predecessor, I decided that I needed to learn as much as I could about the history of the circus in order to match the images, to bring atmosphere to my act. You see, I started researching the history of Ghost Moon in here. Anyway, at first I thought, of course, this is nonsense. Urban legends we know about the curse, this sacrifice story. Carefully interrupted Bill Molly. He nodded and continued. Before the circus went to this town, Bill began to notice that his master was not at all well. Although it could be partly put down to the fact that the circus had a lot of debt, that Fred was deep in credit, but the owner was behaving very strangely, calling someone, and then hastily stopping talking. If any of the staff were in the neighborhood, he'd meet strange people again. And then the other day I saw him carrying a plate of food, and he said Bill Freud is struggling with his weight. He's on a diet, and there's hamburgers, fries, sodas, and he was carrying it over to where we keep the old props that we don't use for their intended purpose anymore, but sometimes put out for decoration. You know, like those cages with the animal figures. And I realized it wasn't my business, but I decided to keep track of it there as well. Anyway, we have a big box like that. Bill spread his hands. It's where they used to hide the Wolf Man for the show. I saw Fred dump food in a bag and a bottle of soda in there. And then he left. And I looked into the vents, and there was a man looking at me. Someone was trapped in the box. I didn't realize who it was. But then the next day, the cops came to the circus. They were asking about the missing boy. I put one thing together, and I was sure Bill's voice shook. He sighed and continued again calmly. You know, at first I thought maybe Fred put someone in there as punishment. You know, he has his own strict system of discipline. We have a magician. His name is Stuart. And a couple times, this guy came out drunk. Fred gave him a choice. He's gonna take the fines out of his paycheck, or Stuart's gonna follow him around on all fours and bark like a dog for 24 hours after every time. Yeah, that's not normal. But I thought maybe one of us had done something wrong. I decided to check that spot just in case. Again, there was no one there. The drawer was empty, but I found this. With that, Bill pulled a scrap of clothing out of his pocket. It was a pocket torn from a leather jacket. Mark said his brother had put on a new black cash register. Molly Lulu that evening. Interestedly, she reached forward with her nose and circled the find and slid in quietly. She recognized it. Alex said and demonstrated it to Bogdan. It belonged to that Archie kid too. And then she disappeared the next day. The girl continued. Bill, his gaze darted to the entrance of the tent. Behind him, someone passed by. And I wondered again what it could be. And I also decided to talk to ours. But I don't think anyone had been punished by Fred lately. But I figured, why would anyone share such slick details with me? And yet it still kept me in suspense. But you could report it to the police. Molly waved his hands. It's so easy. You don't think that idea hadn't occurred to me? Bill chuckled. But Freud called me to him after the second incident at our circus, supposedly just to talk about business, about life. And he told me casually that sometimes the police cover up criminals, like the mafia and those who try to interfere. Bill, it's hard. Something could happen to them, and no one would help. Fred knows I suspect something, so he's decided to shut me up. But I'm gonna search the circus again tonight before we leave. And if I find someone, it doesn't matter. You and me, Alex said. You believe him? Molly gasped. Don't you think it's a trap? Yes, shrugged Alex. But we have a way out. He's our only ally in this damn place. But to make you feel more comfortable, and here he shifted his gaze to Bill, I want you to know that I told a friend of mine. He's retired military too, but he's gonna talk to someone. He's gonna do some digging, and I think he'll be in town by morning. So if something were to happen to us, well, we trust you, but we're not defenseless, gullible loners. And that's a good point, because I don't know what we're all facing. Your dog, he nodded at Lulu, he's gonna sink his teeth in. If it comes down to a fight with the bad guys, my girl will be just happy to do it. Alex grinned and patted the sheepdog behind the ear. We had to wait a couple hours. Bill had to go away to perform his number, and also to jokingly rub in style with the circus guests, to take pictures with everyone. But finally, he was back. He had to fulfill his duties right today and now. Otherwise, his absence would certainly be noticed by the host. There's only one other place. I think only Fred knows about it, because it's all his and me, because I seem to know the most about the history of this circus. Bill led his companions an elaborate path, so as not to run into Fred. He led them to where the props were stored. You see, the motor home is a vintage 50s model. Fred said he wanted to restore it so he could drive it around the country one day when he retired. Until then, it's under lock and key. But I think it's someone very serious. Bill frustratedly tugged on the new lock on the door. I can do it. Alex pushed him aside and then took something out of his pocket and started fiddling with the lock. A couple minutes later, there was a quiet click and the lock was opened. Hey, there's the one who looked inside first, Bill. Oh, burst out from him amazed, and Alex and Molly filed inside the van. There among the old junk, handcuffed to some fixtures in the walls on an old mattress thrown on the floor, sat Soap and Archie. The teenagers' mouths were like shadows around shawls, but ripping them off was a matter of a couple of seconds. Quietly, sternly commanded the captive, "Don't make any noise." He nodded at Bill. "Friend, and we'll get you out now. Please be quiet for the babbling. I want to Mommy and Daddy, everything will be okay." Molly helped her friend up. The poor thing could barely stand on her feet. "Can you walk, boyfriend?" Bill asked Archie. And the teenager nodded. "Where did he come in?" "Archie." "Who?" Molly asked. Fred rounded Archie's eyes. "He's always around. He's a psycho, a maniac." Suddenly, the doorway to the van was blocked by the figure of a man. "A maniac? How rude. I guess you young man never understood what I was trying to tell you." Alex, Bill, Molly, Archie. They turned around in horror and froze, because Albert was pointing a gun at them. "Listen," Alex turned to him. "Don't do anything stupid. The police are on their way." The police smirked at Fred. "These fools don't understand anything." Ah, the circus. Anything can happen in it, and to anyone. It's a realm of magic. Except Fred's face was sinisterly contorted with malice. "Who says magic is only good? Don't worry, my dear guests. By the time the police get here, there won't be a trace of you. They won't find you. I know how to hide what I need to hide." Boss Strongman, raising both hands, stepped forward carefully, blocking his new acquaintances with his own body. "You're an educated man. Damn it. How can you believe in him? Damn it." Fred asked confusedly, and his face took on a thoughtful expression for a moment. And then he laughed. "Do you think I need this couple to be sacrificed? Well, do I look like an idiot to believe in a town scarecrow? No, my lovelies. It's much simpler than that." Fred suddenly more serious. "Do you know how much a man is worth on the black market?" "I do. You know, I was shocked when I found out how my dad, and my grandfather before him, kept Ghost Moon afloat. Turns out, all you have to do to keep things going is catch a few idiots a year and then sell them." "You're a scumbag," Alex hissed. "I've known people like you, and believe me, you're idiots. Sooner or later it's going to end badly." And another naive one shook his head. "This is big business, and I don't think that a loner who wanted to play knight will be able to change anything here. Who are you anyway? It doesn't matter." Alex is having a hard time pulling herself together. "Look, if you agree to cooperate with the authorities, I'll do something to get you a better deal. You can even get out early. Yeah, and think about it. Freud's deliberately fake thinking. No, I don't like that option. Why don't we play by my rules? And all of you will handcuff yourselves quietly." And then he didn't get a chance to say anything. Something dark, big and menacing came at him from behind, and Fred's hand went up more often than not. "Get down," Alex shouted. And the bullet traveled upward, narrowly missing Bill's head. After another moment, Alex and Silax tumbled out of the van, throwing Lulu to the rescue. The sheepdog, who had gotten in the way, for some unknown canine reason, arrived just in time and quickly recognized Freddy, who was threatening his master, as a bad guy to set his teeth against. Lulu didn't eat Molly's crap at the sight of this fight, in which Fred was clearly the loser and the pathetic party broke into nervous, hysterical laughter. Soon Bill and Alex managed to pull Fred out of the sheepdog fight, and after a couple of commands from her master, Lulu was once again a malleable, quiet dog. And then cheerful melodies, which became on the circus shrill sounds of police sirens. No one moved to the clearing, littered with cars and containers in which they stored props. Armed cops flew out. "Alex, are you even alive in here?" "Buddy, I told you to wait for me." Squeeze past them. Tall, dark-haired man. "Mike, it's okay." Here's the missing Alex waving his hand to the side, knocking the teenagers into a stand. And this is him barely keeping from kicking Fred, who was lying on the ground. That's our villain and clown. Part-time psycho. Molly stood frozen and almost out of breath. It was as if she had been transported back in time to that horrible day when she and her mom had been in the crosshairs of the police. It was as if the girl had seen it happen again. Only now she would be victimized by mistake and maybe not even survive. No, not again. Molly wrote it down. And then, unable to stand the nervous tension, she just fainted. And the last thing she saw, about 6 days, Alex's face, concerned, sympathetic. She had something else in his gaze so warm and infinitely beautiful. What, Molly? Before she passed out, she smiled. What can happen and change in life in 2 years? Molly had experienced firsthand a lot of things, so much that you just find yourself in a different reality. Then, after she woke up, Alex informed her that his friend Mike had managed to get through to the local police and convinced the senior detective that something wrong was really going on at the circus. Fred did not manage to escape just punishment, and everyone was simply shocked when it turned out that he, as well as 2 of his ancestors, were engaged in such a shameful for human morality and modern society business. And then suddenly Alex told Molly that he wanted to, would take care of her, and would not accept her rejections. He bought a good wheelchair for her mom and closed the debts for social housing. And then he paid for Molly and her mom to move to another apartment. Molly was a bit shocked by this attitude. She didn't know how to react. But Alex explained it to her, and he also talked to Nancy, and she agreed that her daughter needed to study at the university, which, by the way, he also paid for. Alex had also taken care of paying for the surgery that had given Nancy back her ability to walk. And it was all about Alex finally turning 27 years old. According to his father's will, once he reached that age, he had full access to the teenage fund opened in his name. Molly decided to study to become a manager, thinking that this way, perhaps she could find a job anywhere. And when she got her diploma in 3 years, and it turned out that she could really get a good job right away. The offer came from Alex, who, as planned, still moved to Florida and opened a small restaurant there, as well as a hotel for tourists. Over the years, while Molly was studying and he was building his business, they'd seen each other often, of course. But now, when she came to see him for a few minutes, they looked at each other as if they had been apart for 100 years. And then Alex stepped toward Molly, took her face in his palms, and captured a tender yet passionate kiss on her lips. "I'm an idiot," Alex said. "I should have done this as soon as you turned 18. I was too late. Then rushed everything I should have done or said Molly, putting her hands on his shoulders. "Did you learn some kind of mind-reading trick?" He grinned. "It's more like I'm pushing you around by manipulating you into hearing what I've been wanting to hear for a long time. That's how. You're sly. But I'm willing to go along with you. But maybe we should wait. Let's make it romantic. No, let's do it now." She looked him straight in the eye. "Marry me," Alex said, and hugged her so tightly that it was hard to breathe. "I will," she said. "Oh," Molly lowered her gaze and gasped in amazement, and then sat down and picked up a fluffy furry ball in her hand. "What's this lovely thing?" "Lulu?" She's decided to become a mother, Alex said. I didn't keep track of anything. That's just great. You shouldn't give away something so beautiful. So no sooner we're married, and you're already demanding to get another dog. Sounds like the best start to married life to me. Molly laughed. But you have to. And you have to show me your restaurant right now. You've told me so much. I can't wait to see it with my own eyes. You mean our restaurant? Smiling, he took her under his arm and led her forward along the beach. By the spring of the building nearby, Lulu, the sheepdog, and her fluffy puppy were stomping their paws. Nearby,